My name is Adam Schneider. I'm the founder and CEO of Kitsune Security. I'm also known on the internet as Seccour. To talk a bit about myself first, so I'm into Bitcoin since 2012, and I'm also in cybersecurity. So you may have heard since a few years now that a lot of people in tech are interested in a few buzzwords, which was AI, big data, and the word that brings us here today, which is blockchain. And so today I'm going to go through different use cases where you either need or not a blockchain and why. So you don't end up like that, basically, and just throwing away buzzwords around people in your company. So the first use case I will go through is supply chain. So basically, when you are selling something which is physical, or when you're a retailer, for example, there's a whole process which goes from the person that creates the good you're going to sell to you that is going to sell it. So it usually go like that. So where you have the supplier, the manufacturer, the distribution center, and then the retailer, and finally the customer. And some people want or think that a blockchain will be useful to be able to basically trace and follow up with all these actors and to make sure that no one can scam each other. And I think it's not really useful because most of these people usually what they really need is a way to make sure that, for example, here from the supplier to the manufacturer, for example, that transaction did really happen. They don't really need a blockchain for that. What they need will be more like cryptography and timestamping. So, for example, in that case, from the supplier to the manufacturer, both the supplier and the manufacturer will have, each of them will have a private key that they will use to sign the receipt, and also the receipt and the timestamps all together. And both of them will store that receipt, that signed receipt, from them and the other on their own server. And then from that, if there's any conflict between them, they will just be able to say, oh, here's the signed receipt I did have from you. So you can't just go back in time and screw me over, basically. And to be sure that the timestamp is you can add some blockchain to it by using something like Open Timestamp, for example, or any other timestamping solution that's run on Bitcoin or any other blockchain, but Bitcoin would be the best for timestamping. You can just use that, and like that you will be sure that no actor beside these two can compromise on say later on in time that, oh, this transaction didn't happen or did happen at a later time. The other use case I can go through is video games. So you may have heard of these two big video games, which is EVE Online and Second Life. So basically, I took these video games as example because there are two major ones and they have a large community and also ecosystem. And video games like that can use a blockchain, but it's not much necessary, but they can use it with tokens, basically. So instead of having their currency in-game on their own server, they will create a token that will represent their in-game currency. So like that, it will be able for them to help their ecosystem around the game to grow inside the game. So for example, let's say you're a player and you're playing on the game, and for whatever reason there is another community outside the game that want to use the game currency because they think it's a value or it's easier for them to transact with. So basically that player will be able to get his in-game currency out of the game and be able to still transact with it. As a game developer, it's interesting because basically your ecosystem will grow behind the game, and like that it will influence positively the game. And it's also useful because on these two games, for example, or in games like World of Warcraft, there's a lot of people that trade the game currency for real money. And having the possibility to move the currency of the game outside the game will allow other people that may not be interested in the game, but mostly in the economic aspect of it. So they will be able to basically transact and trade with the game currency or game item outside the game without having to bother registering or defending themselves or whatever. There's also another point where you can use a blockchain with video games, which is proof of scarcity. Because let's say you have a very rare item in your game and that is limited only to 100 modded item, okay? And you're like, the players at first only, they have to trust you to make sure that there will be no more than 100 of this item. But then for people outside the game, they might be either not aware of the full supply of that item, or they might get scammed by players if they want to just trade it. So having some scare items represented as token can be useful for, again, grow your ecosystem of the game beside the game. The other point of the other topic I can speak of is for securities. So for securities, a blockchain, like tokens, can be really useful because basically it can bring more transparency than right now when we have like a lot of brokers and a lot of third parties that mostly hold the shares for the clients, so we don't really know who owns what and at what quantity, except for the big shareholders. But by using a blockchain and through assets or token, you will be able to know who owns what, at what quantity, eventually when they did receive it, and other characteristics like that. So it brings more transparency. It's also cut a lot of third parties, such as brokers, which take a lot of times a huge amount of fees, so it cut that. And it can give you also more flexibility because you can either trade peer-to-peer with other people if they are accredited or other stuff like that, depending on the regulation, obviously. And it can also allow you to do more technical transactions, such as, for example, an atomic swap between Bitcoin and Apple shares. So basically, it will be a trustless exchange between your Bitcoin and your Apple shares, so you can do that. So more transparency, less third parties, and more flexibility. The other use case where I see that people want to use the blockchain, which concern mainly the US, I guess, which is gun safety. And it's really easy on why you don't need a blockchain for that, because basically at the end of the day, it's the government that will trace all the gun ownership, ammunition ownership, or the license you may need or not to have to own a gun. So there is no need, since it's a centralized entity that will take care of all these data at the end of the day. You don't really need to have a blockchain for that. The last use case I've seen is for voting. So basically for voting, it's more tricky than just don't use a blockchain for online voting. It's just don't do online voting at all. Because basically by using digital voting or online voting, it brings a lot of security threats compared to normal voting where you go and you just put a piece of paper. Because if you vote physically on a machine, then the machine can be compromised. Your vote cannot be registered correctly. Then if there is a bug in the machine, it can not register your vote correctly, other processes like that, and you can't audit it easily. The other point are that if you want to use a blockchain, that also means that you will probably vote from home, which also bring other tricks, such as someone could force you to vote for someone you don't want to vote. Someone could block you from voting, but that's also true for physical voting. Or they could just, let's say, hack your computer and vote for you for something else. So it brings a lot of traits that most people are not ready for, and that will basically corrupt most elections, basically. And also one fact is that if you go with online voting, then it's easier for attackers to just try to rig your election, because the good point with physical voting with papers is that it's really costly for an attacker to go and like corrupt each vote or change them, compared to online voting where you can be remotely in another country and then just hack individuals or hack directly the servers where all the votes are registered. Yep. So basically what you need to know is for when or not to use a blockchain. So if you need proof of scarcity, you can use a blockchain. If you need, or like if you can cut a lot of third party by using a blockchain, you might be interesting to use it. Or if you need basically your either currency or items or whatever to be traded outside your ecosystem. So for it only work for digital items, obviously. You can also use a blockchain, but for anything else where you want just to like basically if you want to use the blockchain and link it to something physical, then you can just forget about it, because then you will always have the problem of the link between the physical world and the digital world, and that link cannot. It's the same problem in a centralized environment and in a decentralized environment with the blockchain. There you will always have the problem where you will have to trust whoever input the data in the blockchain on your server. So proof of scarcity, less third parties, and if you need to grow beyond your ecosystem is where you will need a blockchain. So if someone asks you to have a blockchain in your company, don't be that guy, basically. And that's it. Any question?
Sorry. This was actually quite excellent to hear everything you were saying. I just have one more comment than less a question. In my past life, for whatever sins I did, I was trying to run an online game. And it's fascinating to hear what you said about using a blockchain or a cryptocurrency to manage your online in virtual currency, right? It's kind of, it becomes a bigger headache. That's what I experienced, because as a game designer, you end up trying to do a lot of inflation and sometimes destroy that money as well, just because you want the prices to go up, and you would lose that control. So I wasn't clear if you were saying use that for that purpose or not.
It can depend, because basically with a game, you have two ways of doing that. Like if you create a token, you can create it in a way that you can still manage to create more token if you want, or you can do it with a huge supply at the beginning and then give it to people at the end of the day. So it can still work as a token. It just depends on how you create it.
Just one more thing about letting the game again, or the game designers take the idea that you can trade the virtual goods outside the game economy. I mean, that could still happen on centralized platforms, right?
Yeah, but then there is more trust involved. So basically, if you want to remove, like that, if you don't want to create a platform for yourself, for your players or outside people to trade your items on your currency, then creating a token will be more useful, so that other people can do that for them in a trustless environment where your players will choose which platform to trust and will have less risk of being scammed, basically. so less headache for users.
I got it. Thanks.
Any other question?
So I agree 100% with what you said, but there is another speaker here, famous Bitcoiner Peter Todd. He says that a blockchain is simply a chain of things, and that we should not push this this definition of blockchain like something new that connects blocks in a way like Bitcoin does, that create proof of scarcity, proof of publication. And Peter usually says, I don't know if it's here in the other room, but he usually says, actually everything like Git is a blockchain, TLS is a blockchain. In this very, very wide definition of blockchain, then everything basically could use a blockchain. While in your and in mine more strict definition, basically nothing except Bitcoin needs a blockchain. So my question would be, what do you think about the trade-offs, the option, the choice to surrender to the desemantization of this word? Like the world is using the world is using the term blockchain in a desemantized way right now. They are calling blockchain basically any kind of public cryptography, any kind of hash link, any kind of tokenization of stuff. So do you think that, do you see any trade-off? Do you think that it would be better to surrender to this very, very weak use of the term and to just maybe talk about Bitcoin when we need proof of work, proof of publication and stuff? Or, I mean, you know that you agree with me that we should keep some kind of purity in the term because it's more scientifically, let's say educational. But can you comment about these two options that we have?
So basically, for the term blockchain, I don't really like it or use it much because like it's way too vague and people have a very bad definition of it. But then, since people use it in a way, I think we could just like follow up with that and try to bring them through other terms while we discuss with them, and not trying to just say, oh, your definition of the word is bad, just use that. Like trying to have some kind of a trade-off and say, okay, you want to use the term blockchain for that, but what you really mean is creating a token. So we'll just use both terms at the same time until they finally learn and move to the right terms. But then having people using the term blockchain as a wall for all these use case it's not that bad, because it's also bring the community out together on only one word, on one definition. So like that, we can then bring all those people interested in this concept and then teach them individually on what they really want and on what they really want to do or need to do. So yeah, the term is not doesn't really matter, basically, in my point of view. Any other question?
To me, a key aspect for this technology is to build consensus. Whether you build consensus in a decentralized matter or in a centralized one, that's the key argument. So I would like to know your opinion about that.
I think for me, the only use case for blockchain will be Bitcoin, but then there's other use cases that are interesting besides consensus, because like for example, for securities, the really good point is to cut a lot of third parties. You will still have to trust the issuer at the end of the day, but you cut the third parties. You don't need consensus or any other thing. You just need to cut as many third parties as possible. And for games, same, you don't really need a consensus, because what will be accepted will be whatever chain is followed by the main game and not by the players, because the players will just follow, at the end of the day, will just follow whatever EVE Online staff want them to follow. Okay, so they don't really need consensus for that. So for me, the only real use case where you need consensus will be for Bitcoin and having a currency, basically. But for the rest, it's not really needed. Or like, it happened, like you end up with having consensus because your token are built on top of other existing blockchains, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum. But then you don't really need to care about that as a token issuer, basically. Any other?
I think time is over, Adam. Thank you very much to Adam for the talk. Thanks, man.